Welcome in, alongside Pierre Nugent, who is against his will using an Apple computer that belongs to his girlfriend because his Microsoft computer that he got from work is essentially a paperweight right now. So we couldn't get him on for weeks because of it. Then all of a sudden we had to make a change. And I will just say this before we get into the topic of the day, which will involve me singing a little bit of a song, Pierre. So just get ready for that. Okay. Before we get into that, I want to go through our Apple versus Microsoft debate here. Garrett you're an Apple guy, right?
Yes, I'm Apple all the way.
Yeah, Garrett's Apple all the way. Emery's got an Apple, right? Yeah, Emery over here has an Apple. Jack, who's not in the studio today, I think Jack was partying on a Tuesday. I think he had Taco and Tequila Tuesday. That's not my theory. That's my theory. But Jack is a both. Jack he walks in both worlds. Okay, so he's one of those guys. Smokey sits here every day with a gigantic beat up Dell, which I'm sure is kind of like the one that you have. But I left the Microsoft cult years ago to join the Apple cult because, believe me, one or the other. And I can tell you my life has been so much easier since then, Pierre.
Well, I'm very happy to hear that for you. But for me, in terms of, and actually it's kind of funny because I do have an iPhone, so I am Apple with my phone. But at the same time, too, from what I've gathered in talking to the tech nerds of the world out there, the Samsung phones are far superior machines. They tell me all the time it's a far superior phone. I haven't tested that theory out yet because we have created in society the illusion that anybody who has a green text should be treated like a leper. So, I mean, but to which I'm not going to really argue about that. I don't really care one way or the other. You can do that with what you will. But the Apple computers, to me, the keyboard, I don't like. I'm so used, like, for my fingers to be in a certain place. And then when I'm on an Apple computer, it's not that. And in terms of, like, there's a bunch of different ones. I had to go through 18 different browsers to finally figure out that I wasn't in Chrome. I was like, why isn't Chrome automatically already, like, installed on this? And I don't know. I just hate Apple computers. I can't stand them.
Well, look, you get used to things. Pierre, I have hope for you, but you are one of the oldest young men I've ever met in my life. And now you're middle-aged, but like even when we were in our early 30s and late 20s and I knew you, right? You still had a bit of a curmudgeonly, I very much know how 65-year-old Pierre is going to be already. I know that. That's already a developed part of your character arc.
I think Apple, in terms of their computers, they peaked when they used to have the floppy disk of Oregon Trail back in the day. That's how I remember using those Apple computers, and that was really the glory days of Apple, if you ask me. It's been all downhill for that company ever since, in my opinion. I'll stand by it.
By the way, we were talking about Oregon Trail on the show the other day.
No kidding.
And I found a free version online that you can play. It looks just like the old one.
Seriously?
Yes.
Oh, you're going to have to send me that.
Oh, yeah. It is sponsored by the state of Oregon. Like, they're the ones who put it out and put it up there. And I rock with the old school Oregon Trail.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't have time to finish it during the show, obviously, because I was just seeing how it worked. But I have to figure out hunting. That was a little bit hard with the keypad thing. Because it's been 30 years since I played Oregon Trail.
They still have the diseases on the game that.
Oh yeah.
Yes. Oh,
yeah. No. Where you name your people, you can name them.
Oh yeah.
I always have. Like, I'm Jedediah. I've got Claude and Maud, and they're twins. Claude and Maud are twins, right?
Yeah.
Or
baby Bartholomew. You know?
Or there were triplets, but we lost one.
Right.
To Rebella.
That's the treachery of the game.
Yeah.
It's, real life. Modern medicine was not around back then.
Can you imagine? Like this is why we're gonna be like our video games. Like, when we had to play those, this is before we had like all these, ridiculous, like violent games that you can have. Like kids now have Grand Theft Auto. Like they think about that. You know what's darker than Grand Theft Auto? Mm-hmm. It is Oregon Trail by far.
Yeah.
Because you're just playing a game and learning about history, and then a 9-year-old dies of cholera.
Correct.
Or drowns as you try to ford the river,
right.
Because of your decision. And
isn't it possible to get eaten alive by an animal too on that game too? Or am I taking that a step too far?
Like bitten by a snake. I think it like rattlesnake bite.
Yeah. Died by a snake bite. Yeah.
Yeah.
These kids who are so worried about their, Mazda, whatever car that they've souped up getting stolen on GTA, they have no idea what it was like out there in the real world.
Look, it's
horse and wagon.
I know GTA is dark, that there's hookers and murder and stealing and all that stuff. That's terrible. But like, at least here's the thing. You go into Grand Theft Auto knowing it's terrible. You go into Mortal Kombat knowing that you're going to be able to rip somebody's arm off. You go into Oregon Trail thinking like, oh, I'm going to take this wagon of oxen from Jefferson County, Missouri, to Oregon and, and learn things along the way. And you certainly do. You learn that life is really fragile in the wilderness.
Correct. And, if you break one of those wheels too, you're screwed. You're stranded.
Yeah.
It's over for you.
Yeah, you got to wait for somebody to come and like trade with you.
AAA and on their way out there, halfway between Missouri and Oregon. It's not coming.
Yeah, no, I know. Like, can you imagine what Wyoming was like in 1838?
Cold.
Yeah.
Cold, I would imagine. Cold.
Not too much, like outside of Jackson Hole, probably not too much different than it is today.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I can't imagine it being all that much different. No, it's not.
Yeah. But I found it. It's a glorious time waster.
Absolutely. Send me that because I've already been wasting enough time of the game that you sent me last week. What was it? The
Immaculate Grid?
Yes, I've been doing that pretty much every day since you sent it to me.
Now, you're a hockey guy. Have you been doing the hockey one or?
I did dip my toe in the hockey one. I actually I've only done it once or twice. I did get 6 out of the 9 squares in hockey the first time I did it. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll tell you this. I've done it so much that if I miss one, I scrap it for the day.
Yeah, that's how I feel about it as well.
That's it. Like, look, I've missed one. Like, sometimes there are like intersections that I know, and so I'll do like even if I try to do one first. So now I've re-strategized. I'm gonna do the stuff that I know first.
Yeah.
For like right off the top of my head. Like if there's Red Sox on the thing, I've rarely missed. I've rarely missed, but
the NBA one, I put too much pressure on myself. This is my own fault. But the NBA one, I have no excuse. In my mind, I was like, I should be getting 9 out of 9 every single time doing the NBA one. And when I can't think of one, I don't even bother guessing. And sometimes I let it expire because I will refuse to be wrong on any guess in the NBA.
Yeah, the NFL one is very hard.
It's harder than I thought it was. Yeah, that one is tougher than I thought it would be for sure.
The NFL one is very hard because free agency is a very new thing. There are very few trades, and most of the time in football, you play like the history of football until very recently was you play for a team for 10 years and then you play for another one for 2.
Correct.
So there's not a whole lot of guys. And if you've got a guy, for example, like Ross Tucker, who we have on the show all the time, but Ross Tucker played for like 8 teams. He was a journeyman. You only know Ross Tucker because he's on TV now, right?
Yeah.
And were you here when Tiffany Blackman was here?
I think I just missed her, or we were ships in the night when she was here.
Yeah. So Tiffany's on his crew, crew now. She's sideline for his crew, but or their crew, but they. But so you'd know that, like those guys, like Ryan Fitzgerald, journeyman. We know Ryan Fitzgerald. We know or Fitzpatrick. We know Fitzmagic.
Yeah.
We know Fitzmagic. But then you think about like a lot of the other journeymen, really, you won't know them because like baseball journeymen actually like play in games. Football journeymen, for the most part, are just kind of there.
The baseball one, I think is the hardest one for me, but it did take me 3. There was a football one the other day when it was Bengals and Falcons, and it took me 3 hours to remember Jesse Bates' name because that's who I was thinking of, and I was like, wait a minute, who is it? It's the safety. Who is it? What's his name? What's his name? I didn't come back to it until later in the afternoon when it finally dawned on me. Oh, Jesse Bates. Yeah, this game is starting to consume my life.
Yeah. There we go. Jesse Bates, Falcons, Bengals, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, they're right. Yeah, bum. Yeah. So, I rarely do the NFL one because I'll get really frustrated. And I know I talk about football 4 hours a day, and it's still really hard for me.
Yeah.
I almost think that the NFL and college one should be intersected, where it's like this guy played for Notre Dame, like if somebody played for Notre Dame and the Bears.
Yeah.
And somebody who played for like the Bears and Cowboys, and then the other one would be like also played for Alabama or something like that, where that to me would make it a lot easier because then I could intersect. But man, the Pro Football Reference Immaculate Grid it's hard.
I'm actually going to check the table when we're done here. I'm actually going to get right back on the horse when we're done. So
there we go. All right.
My progress for sure.
Yeah. I this morning was convinced that Kevin Mitchell had 100 RBIs for the 1986 Mets.
Yeah.
Didn't. Never in his Mets career did he have 100 RBIs. And then I find myself mad at Kevin Mitchell. Not at me for not knowing that. I'll be like, Kevin Mitchell, come on, man.
Right.
You knocked in all those runs like that's what your thing was.
Yeah.
And then you can't get to 100? Punk.
What a bum. Seriously. What a bum.
Yeah. Can't do that 30 years ago for me?
No. I mean,
please.
Listen, I'm trying to win a game here, sir. Like, where were you? Where have you been?
I'm trying to win a game against a bunch of people I don't know.
Right. I mean, if anybody who should understand that is probably Kevin Mitchell.
Exactly.
I mean, come on.
He should get it. All right, Pierre. We talk a lot about conference realignment because it's an ever-present thing. And one of the albatrosses over conference realignment right now is Clemson and Florida State suing the ACC. Now, there are so many tentacles to this one because everybody else who's jumped out of a conference, including the teams that just recently went to the Pac-12 last week when we talked about it, they had like television contracts that were escapable. The ACC's granted rights and television contract lasts until the apocalypse. Like, that's basically what it is. Right. And so FSU and Clemson are suing to get out of it. But everyone else who's left somewhere has had a definite place that they were going. Mm-hmm. Texas and OU definitely were going to the SEC. The 8 schools that the Big 12 got over the last 2 years, when they decided they were definitely going. The contracts were up, they could move, and they definitely went. Same with the Big 10. All over the place, everybody had a definite destination. Florida State and Clemson, A, don't know if they can get out of it, and B, if they, in fact, did get out of it, have no idea where they would go. And then, while I do think that if they were legitimately in the water, some of those discussions about like, oh, no, we're not interested in this or they don't fit our conference would change drastically because of who they are. And then you start going, well, we can make something work. But then again, how long are you having to take a partial share? How much of the network's in this? And when you're talking about the Big Ten versus SEC, which is where they want to be, you're talking about Fox versus ESPN almost completely. So now, granted, CBS and NBC have a little bit of the Big Ten as well, but it's mostly, like you have that and then you have this Fox versus ESPN thing. So it gets really complicated. It gets really, really complicated.
Yeah, it really does. It really does. No, and at the same time, too, and when I read the article yesterday about Florida State and Clemson, it was kind of like, well, I in terms of the most interesting part of the entire article that I found was, the discussion of, well, the teams with the better TV ratings should get a bigger piece of the pie. And I was like, okay, I guess I get that in theory in terms of does that somehow incentivize some of these teams in the ACC who've kind of been traditional bottom feeders, so to speak, that maybe don't have as big a fan bases, don't generate a lot of excitement outside of the conference? Are they supposed to take less? Is that supposed to be an incentive base for them to recruit harder and get better teams and get a bigger piece of the pie? I don't really know. But in terms of media and media consumption, I kind of feel like television ratings is a little bit skewed because we have a lot of people who stream now. We have a lot. The kickoff times, like, I mean, is it an 11 o'clock game? Is it a 2:30 game? Is it a 6? Like that all matters. That your time slot that day absolutely matters in terms of.
And look, network television still the thing. Like the highest rated games have mostly two things in common. They are big brand teams, and they're on ABC, CBS, or NBC or Fox. Right. They're on a network. Not even, ESPN gets big numbers for college football. Don't get me wrong, but if Alabama versus Auburn is on ESPN as opposed to ABC because the game is, Auburn's not as good, and they move that to ABC or ESPN, and ABC gets, say, Notre Dame and USC, right? When they had the rights to that, Notre Dame and USC is probably going to outdraw that one by a little bit just because it's on the network. So the network games still matter. Even in all this, the network games still totally matter in a way that they did not before, right? Or they did before, but like they still do, even with all this competition to get those numbers. So sometimes you could, like, if you swapped out a game for a game, you still might like get a big number, maybe not as big, but Baylor, Colorado this week could get a bigger number than an SEC game just because they switched the network around, right?
Correct.
Because of that. So there's all that. But interesting development that has popped up. Now, count me in the camp, and I've said this many times, that Florida State and Clemson were not doing this to stay in the ACC.
Right.
And I still believe that should this continue, you'll know that they don't care about what's going to happen to the ACC. But I do think that when you look at what the landscape is and what's better for the two of you as a team, and Garrett, I'm going to get your opinion on this too, while being in the SEC might be great, and you have all this, like you guys, the two of you have dominated this conference. Dominated it. Basically traded it off, over like periods of time of like, okay, it's your turn over the last 40 years, 35 years. Like just been able, like, it's Clemson, it's Florida State. And then occasionally like somebody pops up like, hey, yay, Georgia Tech, we did it. Virginia Tech's got a couple, but for the most part, it's been those two schools. Pitt has one, right? But nobody else is like rolling off titles. So if you can get them to give you some more money and know that, like, maybe have everybody acknowledge, yes, we need you guys to keep us together. Let's create something better. Now, granted, uneven revenue distribution is not always a winning formula or ever really has been, but the Pac-12 actually made it work for a lot longer than people realize. In the Big 12, it didn't, because Texas and Oklahoma were just like, running the league and doing all that stuff. I think if Florida State and Clemson are there, it's better for everybody. In all of, like, this is a multi-layered conference thing. If Florida State and Clemson decide ultimately to stay put and they can reconcile with the ACC, then that's better for all of college football.
Yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree with that. And on top of it, too, in terms of, you and I have had conversations about this in the past, Paul, when we're talking about, listen, to the victor belong the spoils. I mean, we work in the sports business, and for some of these teams and some of these programs that have run the conference, that have been the primary driving points for attention in the conference, I can't say, I have a hard time really arguing with myself over the notion of them getting more. It's kind of like, well, they kind of are the reason why you guys are in the playoff picture every year. It's either, like you said, it was either Clemson or Florida State for the longest time. So it's like, why wouldn't they get a bigger piece of the pie? I mean, I'm always, I've never gotten away from the notion of, if you want to win, if you want to be one of the best teams, well, you need to play harder. You need to train harder. You need to recruit better. To me, I know a lot of people will say it's not as simple as that, but to me, it absolutely is as simple as that. I mean, that's just what it comes down to for me.
Yeah. Now, look, the money gap is getting bigger, which is why FSU and Clemson are trying to close that or jump in that big money pool. And private equity's coming. Like, I can just tell you, private equity's coming to almost everybody.
Yeah.
almost everybody. There might be some schools that are like, yeah, we don't really need you. You know, you're going to help fill in some gaps around the way. But the minute that like some of those gaps get filled in, like, for example, say you get to a playoff one year and private equity, NC State has taken private equity and they've never been in the picture, and they've effectively used that private investment and gotten really, really good, and NC State beats Ohio State in a playoff game, then Ohio State's going to be like, hello, big money partners. Right. We just lost to the NC State Wolfpack. Yeah, we didn't know who they were either. Yeah. We're not losing to the Michael Scott Paper Company anymore. Like we're done with that. Like we're gonna buy them out. Like we're gonna make sure, what are they doing that we're not doing? So that I think is coming. But Patrick, and by the way, thanks to Xavier Wolf for the $2 super chat. Certainly appreciate that. Is it better for FSU and Clemson? This is from BU at 12 with Patrick. If it is through 2036, like if they're still there. Well, part of this agreement, according to Ross Dellinger, who first reported the story, and then David Hale from ESPN, Ross Dellinger, of course, with Yahoo, is that part of this agreement would be shortening the grant of rights so that they could, like everybody else is going to get to, renegotiate the television deal soon. Now, it was reported that the television deal is true through 2036, which it is, if ESPN opts in after 2027, a decision that they have to make in February of 2025. So if in February, ESPN decides that they're not going to opt in and they're going to roll out, then the TV deal is done and the ACC is back to the drawing board. And the fact that these two sides are talking about coming back together, I think leads me to believe that as you've gone through court, both of you feel like you're going to win in some aspect of this, but winning in what aspect still is a loss for both sides, because now you've created chaos that you don't have definitive answers for. And that to me makes it to where, like, look, if we don't, there's too much unknown in this. Let's go back and renegotiate and talk about this and see how we can make this better. But where I do side completely with Florida State and Clemson on this is, and I don't like the way they've gone about it. What I would have done if I were them is like, guys, let's figure out a way to make this better, because we're getting screwed here. And we made a bad decision in previous administrations. Let's try to fix that. Yeah,
and I think this, to me, when you're talking about the TV deals and when they're expiring, if it goes from 2036 to 2030, if you're able to renegotiate an agreement to where the TV deals can be renegotiated in 2030, and that goes a long way in terms of keeping Florida State and Clemson in the ACC. I think that's actually a win-win for for everybody involved, mainly because in terms of how media constantly changes in the landscape and the money that's poured into it, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Yeah, I know you want to think that, like, well, we have your TV rights until 2036, but with the way conferences are changing, newsflash, everybody watching at home, media conglomerates also kind of change in a similar way, and they change at a rapid pace. I mean, people acquire people left and right and then re-examine how they want to distribute their media. They re-examine what type of media entity they want to become. So I don't think it's a bad idea. It's kind of putting a little bit of a Band-Aid on the situation. Even though you shave 6 years off of the TV deal, you as a conference, who knows how much stronger you might be by the time 2030 rolls around, and give yourself a better opportunity and reshape and reposition yourself in order to keep those teams in the conference. And who knows, maybe you have a better TV deal out of it by 2030. It's a risk, but I think that's a risk that the ACC should absolutely think is worth taking.
I also think it's a risk that ESPN thinks is worth taking too, so that all this doesn't, like, Disney's not exactly the free flowing money machine that it was a decade ago.
Right.
They've had some different issues, and call it what you will. I mean, they're still doing well. Part of it is they spent too much money on too many things that weren't going to make money back.
You mean like the 18th Star Wars installment of whatever, is going on? Like, you mean like something like that?
Streaming has these companies are losing money on streaming right now. They're all losing money because they think the long term, like they're doing it now because they know it's the future. But the way that they just decided, like, here's money, make this thing. Yeah. SNL had a great thing about Netflix and like how much stuff they were doing. And it's like they would just show like the person like, hey, it's about a girl named Pam. And it's like, okay, here's money, make it. It's Pam. Yeah. Like there's no go.
If you watch the morning show on Apple TV, I highly recommend it to everybody. The first 2 seasons is phenomenal. They have to have great consultants there because it very much has a real TV feel. But in the 3rd season, there's a storyline about this very thing about streaming. Oh, we got to get, so-and-so plus up our streaming network. And it's hemorrhaging money. It's hemorrhaging money. Yeah. So even Apple's like backing off on content, and they have like, again, if they just decided to take over a country, they have the GDP to do it, right? Yeah. But they made all this stuff. It didn't make money back. Like what they could have done, like what they were doing and why it was making money with Netflix or other things we're saying is like, oh, this is a place for me to watch something I like. And then occasionally there's a new thing that you put out on it that I also like. But you don't have to make... You have to make everything for everybody. Like we used to have to wait for things. I remember like when you'd, watch a television show each week and then you do that for 6 months and then you'd wait like 3 months and then, it wouldn't be on anymore. And, those kind of things. It's fine. Like you can prolong the magic a little bit. But so everybody does all these things and goes out there and they've lost money, which means a company like ESPN, which used to be able to go like, or Disney, it's like, okay, here. Do whatever you want. We're going to buy everything. Yeah. Now is having to go like, hey, we're losing money. And as much as like some people want to say it's like political or people aren't following or watching all this stuff because of that. Like, I think that's a very minor part of it. Like, I do think they've taken some losses because they've like kind of gone out on a limb and gone like, hey, we're going to make this movie here. And then they've got a whole group of people like, I'm not watching that. And you're like, okay, but that's very small. What is very big is they made a movie and they made like 30 other movies. And only one of those movies is going to be like a really big earner. The rest of them were all like that. So, same with sports. A lot of movies in the industry lose money. I mean, there's only like when in your studios, you only have a couple of home runs a year at best. And that really, if it's really a home run, that keeps your budget flowing on a year-to-year basis. A lot of these other projects and a lot of these other movies tend to lose money and people don't know that. People don't understand that. They see the summer blockbusters and those are the ones that like kind of keep you going. But some of these other projects, for the most part, they don't make any money on those movies.
Yeah. No, so like they did that thinking like, oh, well, if we just call this Marvel something, somebody's going to turn to it. Well, eventually you found out like, no. We like Marvel, but we like these Marvel people.
And we like a good story too. Like,
we like a good story, but like, we don't like the further you get on the roster, you're like, well, everybody loves your utility infielder, but he's not the star of the show.
No.
You love it when he gets a triple in a big game, but he's not the star of the show. So that's affected the entire business. And then sports, ESPN is so wonky because of the way that they've pivoted through things. Live sports makes money. Live sports gets ratings. Live sports is the last thing on television that's appointment viewing. Mm-hmm. The last thing you can do every year. It's not like a presidential debate or something like that. Right. Like you can do that every 4 years, but it's the last thing that makes money. So they have to point it in the right direction, but also ESPN has decided to push all their chips to the table on the programming that happens when live sports aren't on to like 2 people, and it's Stephen A. Smith and Pat McAfee. And you're building your programming around these 2 people. And I don't really think that works overall for a network. It's
It doesn't. And like now that you say that out loud, yeah, because when you think of the NFL too, which is king, I mean, it owns a day of the week. I mean, there's no other entertainment entity, I think, not just in the country, but perhaps even the world outside of maybe soccer, in Europe, but that owns a day of the week the way the NFL does on Sunday. And they've benefited from the streaming, from the DVRs, because it's like, my mom and dad who love to watch 60 Minutes, they're like, oh, you know what? We can just DVR 60 Minutes and watch the end of the 49ers game, and we'll just watch it later. And that's where sports has really benefited. And yeah, but in terms of ESPN, when they're running, the PLL now on there, I'm like, really? You bought lacrosse? Is that bringing in big numbers? I don't know how big of numbers that's really bringing in. I have to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a lesson they learned with the Longhorn Network, where it's and congratulations to DeLost Dodds and everybody who sold them on that. Hey, who everybody loves to watch, either whether they hate him or love him, they'll watch anything that they do, is us. And you should have a whole network dedicated to us. Yeah. And then they're like, well, what about the other 11 teams in your league? And they're like, nobody likes them. Yeah. Like, what about A&M and Oklahoma and Nebraska? Like, they have a big fan base. It's like, yeah, but, I mean, who hate watches Oklahoma? People hate watch us. People will tune in to watch us. We're gonna do this, and don't worry. Like, we'll take the extra money, and like like we've earned that. And then like, okay, well, how many football games do we get a year? Oh, you get one, our worst one. Okay, great. Will the coaches be happily accessible? Oh, they'll be contractually accessible. Happy. That's, I mean, totally what is happy's a construct.
Yeah. What is happiness really? I mean, what is it?
You can go to our Zen retreat and we'll teach you all about that. Happiness and sadness is all really one big circle. So those things all affect it. I think to circle all the way back to what we were talking about originally, when it comes down to Florida State and Clemson, this is like in the ACC, this is just not the time to be volatile.
Yeah.
Like, this is the time to make a measured decision that can help you for the future and be ready, because Brett Yormark told us this. Everything he's doing is about the next round of television negotiations. It's making sure that you build through the future, because the last round was built on the past, right? So there's nothing you can do in 6 months that tells them like, hey, we're going to get bigger ratings and do this. You have to keep investing in things and make them better so that when it comes back around, they go, see, look at what basketball did. Look at what this did. Look at our football. And then you go up more. The ACC needs to take that same tact. Now, the problem with the ACC, in my opinion, is they're the last conference that has a guy who's the old school conference president in Jim Phillips, who still wants it to be how it was and is having a hard time dealing with this is how it is, which is why he sat on his hands while Greg Sankey during the playoff push was like, look, we know. And was able to pull off the heist of all heists and get an undefeated power conference team pushed out of the 14 playoff for the only time that ever happened in history. He was able to do that. And then Jim Phillips is like, what? I didn't think I needed to do anything. Like, oh, this guy's doing 20 television interviews in 2 days, and you're just like, hey, it's Sankey again on the SEC championship. Okay, well, that's where he should be. Oh, was he on the Pac-12 championship last night on a network the SEC isn't even on? Like, what is going on? Like, when you see Donald Trump pop up on MSNBC, you go, hey, something's different today.
Yeah.
You don't just go, wait a minute. Like, there are things, but that's what happened. That's what happened. And, here we are. But I do think that if cooler heads can prevail here and they can work something out, it's better for all of college athletics right now. And if you can shorten that grant of rights and get to a negotiating window when everyone else is negotiating, then maybe that makes everything better too.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I hope that cooler heads do prevail, because I'm getting a little, conference realignment exhausted at this point. I'm having a hard time of keeping track who's going where and what rivalries we're losing. But I would, for one, and of course I get it. It's got to make sense for the schools. It's got to make sense for the schools. It's got to make sense financially for everybody involved. I totally understand that. But if there's something almost romantic in a sense of seeing Florida State and Clemson going back to their wife and saying, you know what, I think we should work through our issues for the kids. I think that would be good.
Yes, let's do it for the kids.
Yes, 100%.
So what if you guys were sexting with the SEC
and
the Big Ten, or trying to?
There's nothing a little therapy can't help.
Just a shirtless picture of the Clemson Tiger and Osceola. Hey, Big Ten, you up?
Man, can't wait till that lands on TMZ Sports. I'm sure that'll be front page news.
Yeah. just the Tiger, that with it like tight underwear on, and oh, sorry, I just got done showering. I thought I'd send you guys a text. I know it's late.
Like George Costanza would say and understand, the timeless art of seduction.
Yeah, absolutely. When we come back,